Hollywood and Mr. Big, stories from my life. Hello, y'all. I'm Diana Brienne. Well, I've been sharing little stories from my life, different bits and pieces. Now, I did this about 2 years ago, and yet my channel has grown so much in between then and now, that many people have never heard these stories. So if you've heard the story, I hope you liked it enough the first time that you'd love to hear it a second time as well. If you haven't heard the stories, well, I'm just sharing different parts of my life. Some are very lighthearted and some are more, have a little more serious of an edge to them. And so this particular one was in my LA days. And I was working as a young nurse, and I had a boyfriend. And I always call him Young Doctor in Love. He was about 3 years older than me, and I was in my early 20s. And so we were madly in love and, had a great romance. And, I really thought it was going to last forever. And so did he. And yet I was very young, and so was he. And, I hadn't really explored life. I came from a small country town, and this was all exciting to me. And the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, I was kind of overwhelmed by it in a good way, I guess. I really didn't know what it was about. I couldn't see through the tinsel at that time. There was a lot of tinsel, so to speak, tinsel town. And so anyhow, I was dating him, and yet I would be asked out tremendously by other guys, from everywhere. And because of where I worked, I met a lot of interesting people. And this one particular man happened to see me, and he was, I call him Mr. Big, because he was one of the biggest names behind the scenes in Hollywood at the time. And so Mr. Big lived at the very poshest, if that's a word, of hotel in LA, because he flew between there and New York. He was the head of different entertainment, groups, I guess you would call them, entertainment parts of the industry. And he knew everybody. He knew the most famous of people from as far back as you could think. He just knew them all. It was very exciting. Anyhow, he asked me out, but I said, I've got a boyfriend. And so he sent me flowers at my work. He sent me flowers. And he said, I just want to go to lunch with you. So I met him. Well, I took my boyfriend's car. It was an old Porsche, and it didn't work very well. And it had a stick shift. And I got to where the hotel, with my boyfriend's permission, he said, just stay, don't do anything. And yet, don't do anything you wouldn't want me to do. And I said, okay. So I said, I want to go to lunch with this Mr. Big. And so there I was with Mr. Big, meeting him at this expensive, lavish hotel. So I pull up to the valet parker, and I stalled out, and I couldn't get it started again. And it wasn't quite where the valet parker is, but the valet parker came running down and figured it out and got the car, the old Porsche, up there. It was an old one too. Because he was just a young doctor, just starting out. He wasn't even really starting out yet. He was still doing his, whatever you call it, where they're still in the process of learning. And so so I went in, and I was all dressed up. And as I go in, I have high heels on, stilettos on, and I trip on something, and I fall forward flat on my face. And who would be in front of me waiting but Mr. Big? So Mr. Big took my hand, he helped me up, asked me if I was okay, and I said I was just a bit embarrassed, and he said no problem, and we went to dinner in that hotel, and it was just beautiful, it was wonderful. So Mr. Big and I became friends. We did not become romantic partners, we became actual friends. He trusted me, he liked me, he saw this small town girl with an accent and big hair and, everything. And I think the fact that I had a boyfriend kind of helped too, because that was kind of a buffer. I think he was used to dating very, very famous actresses, and they wanted to get married and everything. And here I didn't have any kind of agenda. I just was excited to meet somebody very, very famous, or very well known, I should say, or very powerful in that business. And so anyhow, he and I became wonderful friends, and he connected me, helped me make some connections and things like that. And he was a very good person to have in my life. So one day he decided that we were going to go meet this very famous movie star, and eating out at a restaurant. And so I went to Mr. Big's hotel. We got in his little two-seater Mercedes, black Mercedes with the convertible. And away we went with the top down. Well, there was a traffic circle up in Beverly Hills, and he didn't know how to drive very well because he was used to limos taking him everywhere. And he was from, lived most of his time in New York where they, use cabs or limos or whatever. And so he went through this traffic circle, and I mean, it was so scary with him driving. I was like, oh my gosh, my hair was flying all over. I had like a little hair piece in the back, like the little, what do they call it, wiglets with the little curls and all that. And it kind of blew to the side of the car. It was down in the side. And he wore a toupee, and his toupee fell off. I mean, it was something. So by the time we get to the restaurant, we pull up, and I get out of the car, and I plunked his toupee back on him. I found my little wiglet, stuck it on the back of my hair, and we get out of the car, and I trip, and I break the bottom of my heel. So now I'm clunking along, kind of like this. And I'm clunking along, and we go in, and I meet this huge movie star. And the movie star was so gracious, and I told him, I said, I'm a bit windblown, and Mr. Big, his toupee was on a little bit crooked, and he was a very good looking man, but he just wore a toupee, and so nonetheless, we went in there. It was wonderful. We had a wonderful time, but I will never forget that. It was just so funny. I never rode with Mr. Big again. I refused to drive with Mr. Big. I either drived, or we just, we just met at the hotel and had dinner together. And so Mr. Big was quite a few years older than me. And I think he passed on later from a stroke, but he passed on after I was living in Europe. I was already married, living in Europe. And I had read that he had passed on from a stroke, I believe, or something like that. I don't know, but he had called my mother. He used to call my mother, and he would just say, I just wish her all the happiness in the world, when he had found out that I got married to my husband a few years later. And so he was very happy for me, but we were just friends. We were just wonderful friends. And so, but he did connect me with all kinds of famous people, and I got to know people, and it was a very exciting time in my life. And of course, young doctor in love, we kind of went our separate ways at one point. I think that the fact that I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, and yet I don't think he was either at that point. I think we were both very young, and I think that we just kind of at some point decided on a very good terms, we just kind of went our separate ways. And because I had started to date different ones, and they wanted more than just friendship, and I was kind of pulling away, and it was, when you're young, you think differently. Now looking back, I'm would not be like that. But when you're young and having experienced life, sometimes you're just not ready for that level of a commitment in a relationship. And he went on to be very successful and very happy in his life, and I went on to be very happy in my life. And so but these are the people that, have graced through my life, have come through my life at different points. And I like to just share these different little stories with you, okay? Well, I hope you enjoyed my story, another story from my life. And I hope you like, share, subscribe. May God bless you. And I hope to talk to you soon again. Bye-bye.